Everyone, thank you for tuning in to the Q2 edition of the Boss Town Hall, the best of open source software. Today's topic will focus on how AI is showing up in open source communities. And we have a very exciting panel to help us deep dive into this topic. Before we get started, we do have a few housekeeping items for you all to know. For today's webinar, participants will be in listen-only mode. So if you would like to ask a question, you can use the Q&A feature at any time. Just add that question in the queue. When we get to the Q&A portion of this webinar, we'll draw from the questions submitted. Also, just so you know, within the Q&A feature, you can upvote questions if you see a question from another participant you'd like to also highlight. So, and then also, if at any time you experience any technical issues during this webinar, please drop a note in the chat and we have folks on standby ready to assist. And finally, this webinar will be recorded and posted to the NumFOCUS YouTube channel. So be on the lookout for that. And to kick things off on this exciting town hall, we'd like to welcome to the Zoom stage our moderator for the day, NumFOCUS's executive director, Rachel Kerestes.
Hi, everyone. Thank you all so much for taking the time out and joining us today. We've got a great program ahead. Thanks in advance to our speakers. We're very grateful to all of them for their time and for sharing their expertise with us. We're focusing our time today on a topic that I know is front of mind for so many folks, artificial intelligence, AI. Now, there's a lot that we can talk about when we're talking about AI, and even the terminology, I know, is something that we can talk about in detail. For today, we're going to be language neutral, and we're just going to refer to the technology as AI, but I will let the panelists, of course, choose whatever preferred terminology they want, AI systems, technologies, agents, etc. AI, as you all know, is moving super fast, and open source communities are feeling it from every direction, from contributors, maintainers, funders, policymakers. One thing we can all agree on is that AI has the potential to really transform the way we live, the way we work, and importantly, how we approach open source, which is what we're focusing on here today. AI is creating a lot of opportunities. It's improving efficiency, it's supporting innovation, it helps us solve complex problems faster and more accurately. But that doesn't mean that there aren't things for us to discuss, that there are challenges for us to consider. And, I'm a Gen Xer, so for those of us who have lived through other periods of technological growth and change, we know that folks have a lot of questions about AI, and rightly so. There's concerns about ethical use, privacy, security, and information integrity. And of course, there's the human impact. Whether AI technologies will displace workers to as far as how they will amplify biases. So, in our conversation today, we're just going to start tackling these topics, but we're going to begin to explore both the opportunities and the challenges presented by AI. As this technology continues to evolve, it's going to be essential that we strike that right balance between embracing the benefits and addressing its potential risks. And I think if we do so, we can help ensure that AI is developed and used responsibly for the benefit of society. And so, with all that introduction, let's turn the conversation over to our panel. And we're going to start with our first speaker. It's my pleasure to introduce Travis Oliphant. Travis is the CEO and founder of Open Teams. He's also the creator of NumPy, SciPy, and Numba. And most importantly, he is a co-founder of NumFOCUS. That's the most important part of his bio there, of course. But the foundational libraries Travis has created are now used by hundreds of millions of people worldwide and have been instrumental in making Python the backbone of modern AI. Travis remains an active advisor to AI startups and is a leading voice on the future of open source communities. We're so grateful to have you here today, Travis, and I'm going to hand it over to you now.
Thank you, Rachel. I really appreciate the chance to be here. Just a few minutes. I'm actually in the move from Texas to Utah, and so I'm from a hotel. Hopefully, the internet works for me. But I'm really thrilled to be part of this panel. I think AI is absolutely can be a transformational technology, but it's really important during this time that we remember that AI is just if it helps us, it's good. If it doesn't help us, it's not. And the center of attention should remain with the people, with humans. I got attracted to open source because of the human connection it made. And I recently gave a talk where I discussed how important community is, even more important than the code. We talk a lot about open source. Open source, of course, is referring to the code, but actually the power of open source rests in the people than the communities that surround it. I do think AI will disrupt some of the community dynamics. We've already seen my colleagues at Quansight, for example. There's a wonderful essay that was written about just the impact of lurkers. AI brings a lot more lurkers because people get information differently than they used to. They used to show up on mailing lists. They used to show up in community forums and ask questions. Now those questions are being answered by AI. And so a lot of the people, it's always been hard to understand the impact we're having. I'm still floored by the impact that we've had, those of us in the SciPy and NumPy communities have had in the world, but it took a long time. What I like to emphasize is that while you can see visibly code creation, you can see it produced, you can see code getting built, what's often not seen is the behind the scenes conversations that take place, the alignment that takes place, the relationships that take place that are really essential for code to be adopted, for code to get used. And now after 20 years of watching NumPy get adopted, watching SciPy get adopted, not just among people, but among companies, you realize that every adoption happens because a person decides to make a dependency. Now, what that's going to change a little bit because all of a sudden coding agents are making dependencies on software. So there is going to be an aspect of, is my software available to coding agents and can it be used? Nonetheless, it's going to remain critical that all of the software we create and the communities we create have a human-centric focus. Right now, lots of communities are deciding how they want to interact with AI, and I think that's a wonderful conversation that's taking place, an important one. And communities will have different decisions. Some will decide that this project won't, use AI. It'll be purely humans interacting. Other projects may be AI first, coding agent first projects, where yes, there are humans behind, but maybe it's coding agent first, human overseen. I've seen several people do that and have that situation. So I'm excited by the future. I think the main message I have in this transformative era is coding agents are coming. I've definitely seen this year everybody's using them. So it's not going to be possible to stick your head in the sand and hope they don't show up. They're going to come, they're going to be here. The real question is, how are you going to use them? And are you going to let those coding agents be useful for you and your community? Or are they going to change how you interact with other people? I would encourage people, coding agents will make it easier to be a lone coder, but the most important impact you'll have is if you can connect other people. And I would invite people to use AI to help your communication. One of the powerful things AI can do is it can actually help support improving how you communicate with others. I find myself always thinking hard about how am I communicating, how am I ensuring I build a relationship with somebody. And if AI can help you do that, great, use it because AI can be a tool that helps all of us. I'm optimistic, but only if we center the conversation around the people that make open source communities happen.
Thank you, Travis. I like that, optimism blended with realism there, right? Like, don't stick your head in the sand, but like, let's still be optimistic about where the future can take us. Well, let's get some more perspective here from our next speaker, Noor Aftab. Noor is the global program lead, excuse me, at Amazon, and she's also chair of the NumFOCUS board of directors. This gives her a really interesting dual advantage point on how big tech and open source and nonprofit governance intersect. Noor is a data scientist. She's a TEDx speaker. She has founded a number of companies and projects. She's also led AI and cloud initiatives across Amazon and Google. She's advised organizations from the United Nations to Fortune 500 companies. She's also a longtime advocate for women and underrepresented communities in AI and open source. And I know she's got lots of really interesting things to share on this topic. So I will hand it over to Noor.
Thank you, Rachel. Hello, everybody. I'm so excited to be here. The one thing taking from Travis, I would say, is we that have been around for a bit of time, I've been in the software industry for the last 20 years, wearing all software engineering and data science hats. And one thing we realize is the shift is unlike any other shift that we've seen. AI is here. AI is transforming our jobs, our workplaces, our lives. For the last 4 years, I have led global programs at Amazon Web Services on one of the most loved cloud service, Amazon S3, that today has 1 million data lakes. And it is really the bottom layer. It is the bottom turtle. It doesn't have any other dependencies. So the entire internet relies on this service. And that allows us to think of this in a different dimensions, from the dimension of availability, from the dimension of cost, from the dimension of 11 nines of durability. One of the questions that we get asked often is, does this service ever go down? Like, is it up 100%? No, but it is 99.99 all the way up to 99s. That is the industry standard. And so in building this product, I have had the front row seat with some of the largest customers, with Fortune 500, with brand names that we know and trust, with healthcare, with financial industries. And in talking to CEOs, CTOs, CISOs, and all the alphabet soup that exists, one thing is becoming clear. Agents are here to stay. And then when we look at some of the numbers from a RAND study, 80% of all AI projects fail in production. So I think the place that the industry now is in is moving from cool demos. Anyone can build a website. Anyone can use AI code, AI tool to do a hobby project and to share it and even get lots of GitHub stars. But the real question is, will it make it in production? In fact, last week, the founder of LangChain, Harrison Chase, joined us in Chicago. And the key highlight was evals are the new PRDs or BRDs, the business requirement documents. We have moved beyond demos to production use cases. And that is where people are asking questions about data, about governance, about responsible AI, about the training data. And in Chicago, yesterday, the Chicago AI Week kicked off with the 1871 and AI 2030. And the question was, it kicked us with a Women in AI group. And the question was about inclusivity. What are the people, who are the builders that are there in the community? Who are building that product? And this takes me to the fundamental question, because when I started my career, I was in a class of 36 software engineers, but I was the only woman in the room. Nobody looked like me, nobody talked like me, nobody acted like me. Everyone had ideas that were different than mine. And so in my research, what we have seen is that this is the missing 78%. Women make up only 22% of all data and AI roles. And even more painful is that women are responsible only for 3% of all open source commits. And this is important because we need to see that this is not a gap, it is a structural deformity. And the case of women highlights the case of all classes that are excluded. So it's first-time contributors, it's your underrepresented in tech, it's your LGBTQ, it's your people of color. And that matters because if the voices are not there, what gets built is not representative of us. For example, I'll just give you like two quick statistics. When data is not inclusive of women, such as in healthcare data, it's trained primarily on men's heart attack symptoms. It works 90% of the time, but it doesn't work for women. And so lots of startups had to be closed because of that. In IBM research has shown us that for uh, identification, women are 35% more likely to be misidentified than men. And that means it is that broader question of who gets denied a visa, or who doesn't get a housing loan, and who gets misclassified and goes to jail behind the bars. So these are important questions. I think my question to the community and my discussion with the community is like nobody builds alone. We build together as community. So 3 points I want you to take away is agentic AI is here, but it has to be responsible and it has to have the voices of all of the builders. If this struck a chord with you, let's connect the conversation. And thank you so much.
Thank you, Noor. That's a really interesting point you made about women not being identified. I recently had that happen to me when I was traveling, that my image wasn't identified. It never occurred to me that it could be because I was a woman and the system working, or the system they were using was not working properly. So these are really interesting conversations. Let's keep it going. I'm going to introduce our next speaker now, Daniel Brumund. Daniel is an advisor for AI and digital governance at GIZ. That's the German Agency for International Cooperation. The Competence Center Digital Societies, which focuses on AI governance, regulation, ethics, open source licensing, and NLP. Very small responsibility, Daniel. But from 2022 to 2025, he worked with Fair Forward, GIZ's initiative promoting open source AI for local innovation across Ghana, Kenya, Rwanda, South Africa, Uganda, Indonesia, and India. And there he led the work on community-driven data collection, AI in low resource languages, and equitable data governance. So let's hand it over to Daniel at this time.
Thank you so much. Thank you, Rachel. It's really an honor to be speaking to all of you. And yeah, I think I may be bringing in a bit of a different perspective. As Rachel has said, I've had the privilege to work at GIZ within German Development Corporation on how AI technology can be designed and used to help attain the Sustainable Development Goals with partners in Africa and Asia. And in that work, open source has really been a core approach to build on collaboration, on transparency, and to really foster ecosystems of innovators, of other stakeholders who can build better services and products with open source AI. And one area that I've been particularly passionate about is language technology and how to support efforts that make language technology more inclusive and accessible in languages and for language speakers that are underrepresented. That matters because language tech is such a foundational layer to make products and services more accessible to people in their very own language. So in 2018, we began collaborating with the Mozilla Foundation and their Common Voice team, along with universities and innovators in Rwanda, to collect open voice data in Kenya, Rwanda, which is one of the official languages, for open speech recognition models. And out of that work, that work really sowed the seeds for so many more beautiful projects that came out of that, supported by Fair Forward and others. We expanded the voice data collection to Kiswahili and its dialects in Kenya, the DRC Congo, and Tanzania, supported by the Gates Foundation. We supported organizations who use open source AI to make products and services more inclusive. One project that really stuck with me is Haki des Femmes, means Rights of Women, by Core 23 Lab in the DRC. It's a service that makes information about land rights and legal information more accessible to women so that they can exercise their rights. We're part of a AI for Development Funders Collaborative that supports language tech. They support Masakane, which is a Pan-African network of 3,000 data scientists that are advancing language tech with, by, and for African communities. And and another important area that has been coming up is the licensing of data sets and what equitable licensing frameworks look like. That licensing that is non-extractive, that also helps ensure that benefits from using language data or AI training data more generally flow back to data provider communities. There's a license called the ISETU licensing framework, or the Nuelito Obodo Open Data License, short Noodle, that attempt to put in place a more reciprocal exchange between data providers and users. And we put this into practice in Kenya with Mozilla, with Maseno University, and with SciPy, who held a series of workshops with speakers of the Dulua language for them to decide which license to place on their language data that they were collecting. They chose the Noodle license I just mentioned, and that data set is now hosted on the Mozilla Data Collective, a platform to host licensed data sets and to facilitate usage exchange. So all that, having said all that, I would like to leave you with 3 shifts of understanding open source AI that have surfaced from our work. And for each one, I've got a bit of a call to action, and maybe some of them relate to you. So the first one is that what we've learned is that openness and open source mean different things when you talk to developers and other stakeholders in Germany, in the US, in Canada, in other global north, global minority countries, compared to developers and stakeholders based in Kenya, in South Africa, or in other global south, global majority countries. I mean, you can ask yourself, who has the time and resources to invest in and to build products with open source AI? Imagine a language data set in Kiswahili that is created through community crowdsourcing, maybe with Common Voice, then placed in the public domain, and then it is used by an international corporate before local developers can create anything meaningful with it because they don't have the required resources. Is that equitable, or is that extractive use of open source AI? It's a tricky question. So my call to action to you would be to say, let's embrace maybe a more nuanced gradient understanding of openness. Ask open for whose benefit? What resources can you make available? Can we make available so that communities can build with and benefit from open source AI, open source language tech? The second one is that when we talk about impact of AI technologies, for instance, for sustainable development, we mustn't mistake size for impact. That's a notion that's really popular with some of the developers of the large LLMs who go for size at all cost. But there's a growing movement calling for small AI, frugal AI, human-sized AI. And it means the use of small AI models that are fine-tuned to be fit for context in a specific sector, agriculture, education, health, in a specific region and language. And there are networks like Masakane and companies like Lelapa AI in South Africa, Ghana NLP, Sunbird AI in Uganda, and just naming a few that I've been working with, who are building small language models to help build better services, to help increase environmentally friendly economic competitiveness because of reduced cost of usage and resource consumption. They reduce dependency on external providers, and in true open source fashion, foster local capacities in innovation ecosystems. So my call to you would be to recalibrate how we understand impact, not by size, by multiplicity. Look at small AI models and what you can maybe do to contribute and to support them. And then the last one, and I know I'm at time, so I'm going to hurry up, is that when we talk about open source, what we've learned is that we also need to talk about power and how to distribute that power. The first 2 points that I made already touched on that. There's a need to make visible who has the means and the power and the resources to contribute and to make benefit and to benefit from open source AI. So when you work on language AI with communities in the global south, and when you ask someone like me who's not part of those communities, you need to show up with humility, with deep respect, and with a willingness to engage meaningfully with communities. And that last point is really important. Professor Vukosi Marivate, he teaches in the University of Pretoria in South Africa, and he's also on the UN's International Scientific Panel on AI. He calls this the necessary friction of engaging with communities, and a prerequisite if we want to build data sets that are community-owned, verified, and that serve a very specific local need, and not just the pursuit of the next largest data set. So my call to action would be when you engage with communities, to lean into this friction of engaging with communities, to listen, to not impose our notions of what openness is, to build trust, and to build open source AI with and not for communities. Thanks. That's been a mouthful. Rachel, back over to you.
Thank you, Daniel. I love that final point there, though, to embrace the friction, right? We often talk about that, but how often do we actually do that? And yeah, as much as we could also debate what's the right terminology around AI, we certainly could around open source as well. So maybe we'll have to do another conversation on that specifically. Maybe that's our next webinar. But now I'm going to introduce our next speaker. Yujian Tang, sorry, Yujian. He is the founder of OSS for AI. It's one of the largest open source developer communities in the world. He's been a guest lecturer at Stanford, a software engineer at Amazon, and a published researcher, another person who has tons and tons of free time, right? He brings to us today a rare and wonderful combination of community building, commercial and investment experience, especially to the question of how AI is reshaping open source contribution and sustainability. And so it's my pleasure to introduce you and hand over the mic.
Thank you very much, Rachel. Hello, everyone. I'm going to touch on 5 topics today. So the first thing I'll touch on is community, and then I will talk about experience doing hackathons. I run a lot of hackathons in my community, so I'll talk about what I see there. And then online and in-person learning. This is a very fast-moving era. The technology is moving very fast, and so learning is very, very important. And then I'll talk about more into the commercial aspect. I'm also a VC, so I'll talk about open source growth. And the open source ethos, and then investing in these projects and what their commercialization looks like. So the first thing that I'll touch on is community. So I run OSS for AI. We call ourselves Open Source for AI. We're a community that is built on the open source ethos of having a shared knowledge base, making things public, making things available, and helping developers really grow. So over the last 3 years or so, this community has grown into 2 sets, one live community that's almost about 50,000 people, and then one online section that's about 400,000 people. And we have done a lot of events, and we've seen a lot of projects get presented, early stage startups come and present with us. We had like companies like Portkey, which recently exited to Palo Alto Networks. And we had companies like InsForge, which recently got funded through YC and just raised a seed round. And other projects come through. And one thing that I really noticed, and I think is very important in this era of rapid technology growth and this era of generative AI, is that one of your advantages will be your community. If you are able and willing to show up to your community type events and meet people in person, this will give you a really nice advantage in the sense that you'll actually be able to know what's going on, and you won't be like another voice that could be potentially like, if you've heard of dead internet theory, potentially just another voice on the web that could be a bot. So I think number one is one of the biggest advantages that you're going to have in this era, assuming that you are interested in developing your career and other things like that, is to show up to your community and be part of things that are happening in person, or ask questions if you're going to be online. Now, the next thing I want to talk about is hackathons. I've been running hackathons for a long time, and I think hackathons are a great place for people to build things. One of the things that I always have at my hackathons is I always have people produce an open source library, not necessarily a library, an open source project that shows what they build. And one of the things that I've really noticed over the last few years is a shift in the teams that are forming, the teams that are winning, and the projects that are being made. So when I first started doing hackathons way back in the 2010s, you pretty much couldn't, you wouldn't really see any teams of less than like 3 or 4 people. It was very uncommon to see one-person teams. And of course, this kind of persisted all the way through 2023, 2024, and it was really 2025 and this year that there was the rise of these coding agents like Cursor and Klein and Lovable and whatever, that you started to see really, really commonly. I started to see a lot of 1- and 2-person teams. And in the last hackathon, I just ran a hackathon this last Friday in San Francisco. In the last hackathon, we did a 1-day hackathon, which was literally like a 4 to 5 hour hackathon. And there were 40 projects that were made. And out of those 40 projects, over 20 of them were made by 1-person teams. And we had 7 winners. And out of our 7 winners, 4 of them were one-person teams, and only one of them was a 3-person team, and the other were 2-people teams. So I think right now, AI has made it so easy to build that if you want to build something, it does not take that much time and it does not take that much effort for you to go out there and just start building things. And so if you have ideas on your mind, like now is the time to go and tackle those ideas. The next thing I'll talk about is online and in-person learning. So I teach courses on Maven. I teach courses on LinkedIn. I've had over 30,000 people take my courses. And one of the things that I think is very important in this era is really like in the community sense, like, show up and ask questions. Of course, there's always a lot of free content and content that is not guided. Like if you are autodidactic and you can go and read things and learn things yourself, that's actually a great way to go and get started. That's a great way to do things. But for more advanced topics, and I attend these courses too, is to go online and really just like go in person and ask questions and things like that. Okay, my last couple minutes here, I'm going to talk about the commercialization side of things. So open source has long been known as a popular, fundable, and nice business model. So, right, we have companies like Vercel, and I worked at Zillis, and Databricks was built on Spark and things like that. And so, I think right now, one of the things that is really important for open source companies, if you are thinking about starting, or if you have a project that has a lot of stars, is the traction side of things. Like I was saying, it's really easy to build. And now what's really important is that you can show that you can not just build, but you can also get your project into people's hands and they like it enough to use it and continue using it. And so distribution and stickiness is one of the most important parts of having an open source business model now. It's much more important than it was before. In 2021 and 2022, you probably could have raised, and in fact, I know companies that have raised hundreds of millions of dollars on a product with some traction and zero revenue. That is no longer the case. Because it is so easy to grow, because it is so easy to just build, because it is so easy to build and just put things online. Traction is very important, but so is commercialization. If you want to raise money, especially if you want to raise a Series A, you're going to have to show some revenue. We just invested in InsForge, which actually I had met the guy who built InsForge at one of my hackathons a couple of years ago. He had won the hackathon. We kind of kept in touch, and he was like, "Oh, I'm going to do this startup," and I was like, "Great." And so it was really great to see him build the startup, to see them go to YC. We invested in them. And one of the things that I've had a lot of conversations with other investors, because people would call me and they'd be like, "Hey, like, this company, the founders, like, should we invest?" Or, not should we invest, but like, let me get your opinion on this. And so one of the things that has come up a lot in these conversations is this company making money? Is there really revenue here? And I think that is something that is going to be more and more common around AI companies, especially as you hear this talk of there's an AI bubble and there's a lot of projects and there's a lot of money being thrown into the void and nobody's actually doing anything. Nobody's using these things. So it's really important that you find something that is commercializable if you're thinking about starting an open source company. So my one takeaway for you is that it's a really good time to build. If you like building things, if you have projects in mind, now is the time to go do it and show up in your community, find ways to learn about why or how people would use your project. And then you can use that to build traction and really grow a company. So that's all for me. Thank you very much. Back to you, Rachel.
Thank you, Yujian. That was I loved the division there. One of the things when you said about is the revenue there, I'm old enough to remember the dot-com boom and bust of the 90s. So some of the laws of economics often come into our world in ways that we're not expecting. So it's always a good reminder if you're trying to commercialize something that you need to demonstrate the revenue coming from it. Okay, so we've covered an awful lot of ground very quickly with all of our speakers today. We're going to move into our Q&A session right now. A reminder that if you have questions for the panelists, to please enter them into the Q&A chat. There is one that was already submitted, so we'll have our panelists come on camera here to join me as I read out this question, and whoever wants to take this, first can jump in on it. So this question is, how can projects make use of coding agents that may generate code that are not compatible with the project license? Are there LLMs available that are license aware of their training data? So any of our panelists who have a thought on that question, please feel free to jump in. Or anyone at once. Anyone on the panel know about the licenses for LLMs? Travis?
I do not. I'm not super qualified on this one. I've been looking at it very hard, and I've got my co-founder Peter Wang at Anaconda is actually very interested in this personally. I would say it's still untested. Most people are pretty confident that there's not going to be a challenge using coding agents in on this front, but it hasn't been tested. I don't know of any model that sort of guarantees that it's license free, that's clean. But it's a great question. I think it's a space we're all kind of exploring, and it'll probably be so many people are using it that at this point it's gonna be really hard to pull that back in the bottle. Like if somebody hasn't actually claimed a license violation already, I think they're not gonna be able to. So essentially, it's similar to if you own property in the United States at least, and you don't like wall it off and people consume it as a walkway, it becomes essentially public property. And so there's a similar aspect to licensing here that may apply. I'm not a lawyer. I just know that I think right now I would not. I don't. And that's not my biggest concern. I think the real question comes to receiving will even if one of the big model providers tries to claim that they have a license to the code you're generating, that would be a really hard thing for them to do. But it's very unclear right now. I would just say I've had a lot of experience with lawyers and IP licenses. I am not concerned about that question. That's the only thing I can give.
I don't know a lot about the legal practice around this either, but I would also not be very concerned with licenses. Not because they're not like important or whatever, but because this is like a commonly like it's a very hard to show or prove type of thing.
Okay. Well, thank you guys for, oh, go ahead, Noor.
Yeah, I
Sorry.
do have sort of a different take on this. Because the AI Week just kicked off in Chicago, where I am right now, and one of the conversations that came out from all of the panels, because everyone is building beautiful stuff, is around always having a lawyer in. This goes back to the human in the loop and how we are building and what mental models are we using for it. Yes, you can use coding agents, and yes, you can use LLMs. And of course, that's not my area of expertise, but one point that came across was as the legal landscape is constantly evolving, there are a lot of litigations that are going on. So it's best to always have an attorney in the loop or to consult them.
Daniel, anything you want to add on this one?
Yes, my mic. As someone who doesn't know, not really, sorry.
Okay, no, that's fine. Everyone else spoke, so I didn't want to leave you out. Well, let's jump into the next question here because I actually think this really cuts across what points that almost all of you made. So this question is the fact that AI enables a single person team really a good thing? In open source, community building has always been an important characteristic, not to say the most important one. One of the dangers of AI is the reduction of the needed friction between users and developers, where users can live in their own bubble, mostly isolated from developers. So this question, I know, Yujian, you said, you're seeing teams win the hackathons with one or two folks. And, Daniel, you were talking about like where things, you were talking about the friction, but also who owns what. And Travis was emphasizing community. Noor, you were saying, don't leave folks out. Is it a good thing that these are kind of smaller teams or that you can do a lot more of it yourself? Anyone can jump in on that.
This is a great question. I think this is exactly the space that's being explored right now. My take on this is that it will enable smaller teams to do more. And so that will change the landscape of open source and kind of make the dependency tree and the dependency management harder. I mean, there's always been this tension between getting everything in one place versus separating things up. I think that what the Python became popular because it was a way for non-programmers to code, and that had some implications for sure. Now with AI, these coding agents, all of a sudden, many more, 100x more people who are non-coders can quote unquote code, can produce. So I think it's definitely going to put a lot of pressure on the kinds of projects that work well. I'm not a fan of the company of one. I think that's hyped, overhyped, just because humans don't do well isolated. I think you're going to want at least to have teams of 2 to 5. I do think it helps shrink the number of people that are necessary to make a project succeed from it used to be, dozens to potentially a few. I still think there's going to be rings of participation around projects, though. You'll have, and I think even more, there'll be empowerment for evangelists, for educators, for uh, active participants, active contributors, because people that otherwise would have been a little held back, they can use coding agents to help them communicate better. One of the hardest parts of engaging with open source is just even the lingo. What are people talking about? You see, how do you participate in this thread? And you could actually, right now, today, people could use a chat bot to kind of say, well, what's going on this thread? Well, here are my thoughts. How would I say this? And then come up with better ways to engage in the conversation in a way that can be meaningfully adapted by the folks involved. So I think there's both of these tensions happening. Ultimately, I think what it will mean is projects don't have to scale to everybody to be popular. You'll have a lot more projects that are smaller teams, I think, but there'll be many more opportunities to participate, and it'll increase the need, frankly, for, let's call it, open source media, open source communication, open source curation. Just even what's available, how do you sort through all that? I think the need for that kind of open source news, let's call it open source distribution communication, will just grow and grow and grow and grow. An opportunity for NumFOCUS to fill potentially, or other kinds of open source community organizations, just to help people understand the landscape.
I think it's great that AI is enabling more people to build. I think, like Travis was saying, one of the things that Python did really well is that it helps not non-coders, whatever, non-backend, like people who are in like C++, Java stuff, build things. And I think this is basically one of the things that AI does really well, is that it allows people who are not very technical, not very strong technical, to build things. However, I don't think this actually enables one-person companies in that sense. If you do not have a software background and you want to deploy a project and you want it to deploy to, let's say, not even millions of people or thousands of people, but even hundreds of people, you're going to have trouble. And I like, it's just not there yet to do this. There's a lot of companies that are building around this. But I think that's a pipe dream. That's something that influencers are selling you. It's not real. And then for one-person companies, I think one-person companies are great. I think they're absolutely amazing if you want to run a small, like, cash flow business. And I think it really levels, it lets people who don't have who wouldn't have initially had the bandwidth to run a full company, run a company by themselves. And so I think it's really great. I think it's a great enabler.
So picking up on that, let me adjust the question a little bit as we toss it also to Noor and Daniel. Does some of this reduce barriers that would allow folks in more geographic diversity, more racial, ethnic, gender diversity? Does that reduce some of the barriers to having people participate, or does it create new barriers to keep people out?
I think one of the things that from my research on responsible AI, and I did a paper with SciPy, which was about missing 78%. When you have first-time contributors, when you have people with a non-technical background, or when you have underrepresented in tech, community is all the more important rather than less important, because say you're coming from a GUI background to a CLI background, and you're used to just seeing things in a certain way, and this is a new paradigm shift for you. This is a new mental model. Sometimes as simple as you're welcome in the community, here is like the first step that you can take, and then following up with them opens up a lot of opportunity. I think the other thing I wanted to parse from this was it is creating a lot of opportunities for builders and developers to think about quick proof of concepts, your minimum viable products. I think back in the day were with wireframes or Figmas, and now you're expected like a fully functional or partially functional website of sorts. But I think the big question is, to a point someone touched earlier, is about commercialization and taking it in production. The things that work for single coding teams do not work in production. And I just know that from the Amazon experience and from building a service like S3, it takes a village to do that.
Yeah, I mean, I would maybe just add on to that to say that I think it depends on what kind of product or service it is that you want to build, right? And in terms of barriers, Rachel, I think that's a great question, but it also depends what kind of barriers or what you see as barriers, right? Maybe to make it more concrete, like if you want to build a service, say, that makes like a chatbot that makes government services more accessible, which is something that we did in our work with partners with the Kenyan government, for instance. There's no way that you can do that as a one person developer company. No way. You need to do it with more people. You need to engage with the government partners. You need to engage with the citizens, with the communities. What I mentioned before, you really need to lean into the friction. You can't, use some vibe coding tool, build something that looks very flashy, but hasn't been tested and all that, which leads me to the barriers, like if the barrier is how do you code? I'm not a coder myself, but even there, I would have questions. Yes, you can build an MVP, but are you able to then to really analyze any sort of, I don't know, coding, any risks that are in the code that you don't see because you're not an expert? I have a question about that. But any other barriers, like if you see engaging with communities to build something co-creatively as a barrier, and these kind of tools help you to reduce those barriers, I think those are barriers that need to be there. Not barriers to block you completely, but barriers that you overcome with whomever you're building this for, so that you can build something that actually has meaningful impact. For instance, to have easier access to government services in local languages.
So, one of the themes that you all touched on here today was just the importance of the human element in everything that we do, right? Even from as simple as, Noor saying like, bring a lawyer along with you. They have an expertise that a LLM is not necessarily going to provide. How do we make sure that we keep the community and the human element involved as we go forward? Yujian said that, the best way to learn is to show up and ask questions, right? Daniel just said that we need to involve all the communities, that concept of like, if it's, nothing for us without us, right? And, Noor's talking about the missing 78%. So let's, as our kind of wrap up question here, so how do we make an effort to keep the human element involved, and what things do we need to do to keep building and maintaining those communities?
Rachel, I love that question. Love the conversation so far. Daniel said something about meaning, like make it meaningful. Humans are what creates meaning. The language models don't. They're just tools. And so even the question of how do I make this meaningful? Well, you have to rely on a human to even answer that question, because the only thing that gives the tools meaning is the human. And so I think that's part of it is you seek out serving other humans. And as long as there are humans on the planet, there's going to be meaning and value in creating and serving those humans. And what we have now is just better tools that can enable all of us to serve each other better. And I'm so excited by that. But in the spirit of that, you have to kind of keep asking to find meaning, find what the meaning is. You have to go find it out. And so it requires that engagement, that connection, to even understand what to do tomorrow, today. And then you can prompt AI to do it. But AI is a tool that just does, in the hands of somebody who puts the meaning to it, it can do amazing things. In the hands of kind of just randomness, it can create psychosis and kind of all kinds of crazy outputs may be fun for an afternoon laugh, but ultimately the meaning is defined by the human. And with that in mind, we can move forward, just trying to create more and more meaningful, better connections with each other, and see it as a tool to help us do that.
I think like community itself is kind of like you build communities around common interests, common topics, and it's just a bunch of people coming together who have an interest in like a similar thing or a similar set of things and like talking and hanging out and whatever. Like Travis said, the LLM, these thing AI, these are tools. It's not really going to change like the human desire for community. Um, I think like, you know, if you feel that you have the desire to go and join and be part of communities, which I think most people do, like you should just go do it. And AI is so popular right now that you can pretty much find, if you like AI, you can pretty much find anyone to go talk about it. Now, I will say that there is like the caveat that like, you know, there are like more, let's say, um, legit. I don't know. I don't have a better word for this, but there's people who have more like real experiences with this than there are like, you know, than others. And maybe you want to seek those people out and maybe you need to kind of develop a heuristic system to understand, you know, who's selling a pipe dream and who's like actually talking to you about real things. And maybe that's something you care about, or maybe it's something you don't. You know, it doesn't really matter. Community is just one of those things that, you know, people like, and you can just participate in whatever in whatever you like. AI is so popular now, you can kind of go find it anywhere.
Or Daniel, would you like to jump into before we wrap up?
I mean, I would have, yeah. I mean, you know, I guess what I would say is like, don't see the human element, the community element as a glitch or barrier to just iron out and skip over, right? Like Travis said earlier, people and community are what makes open source, be it in AI and software. And, you know, so that means, you know, invest the time, invest the resources to build with communities, show up, engage, like Yujian was saying, you know, have workshops, hackathons with communities, and go to community halls or whatever means of engagement you have with the particular community that you're building a product or service for. And maybe to bring it back to one of the partners that I mentioned earlier, Masakane, which is this Pan-African data scientist network. The word Masakane is actually Zulu for we build together. And I believe that's key, you know, build together, listen, learn, yeah, and build services together.
I think everyone has added such a powerful perspective. All I would say is um, we like we like talking to LLM, chatting. We like RAGs, but what is really taking everyone's attention is agents because they do. So there is a do portion for each and every one of us who serve as leaders in the community. I'm a mom of 10-year-old twin girls, and every time I think about like, oh, there's an opportunity to step up for Society of Women Engineers or IEEE, or this community really wants me to come in and give a keynote or do some research, and I'm thinking like, my daughters need me, but then I'm thinking about the future that I want them to have. So that piece is on me. But then the other thing is about for each and every one of us in the room who is sitting there, who is listening, who's looking for that nudge. I think the great divide is not going to be people who are learning AI or building with AI. It's people, it's each and every one of you who's sitting there listening and not taking action, because not taking an action is an action itself. So let this be your call. There are so many communities out there, and we at NumFOCUS welcome all of you to come and join us and to explore our projects. This is a very friendly space. This is a safe space. You're amongst friends, and everyone fails when you're building. So when you do it with a community, your chances of success increase exponentially.
And I think that's a wonderful point for us to wrap up the Q&A on. Thank you to our panelists. I'm going to hand it back over to MK and as we conclude for today.
Awesome. That was amazing. As we come to an end of this highly interesting webinar on artificial intelligence, we'd like to extend our sincerest thanks to our speakers for sharing their valuable insights, expertise, and perspectives on this rapidly expansive field. We also want to thank all of you who attended today and for your active participation. We weren't able to get to all the questions, but we encourage you to connect with our speakers and continue the conversation offline. We hope you found today's discussion insightful and inspiring as we continue exploring the opportunities and challenges around AI, especially what it brings to our community here at NumFOCUS. Lastly, a reminder that the recording will be posted on NumFOCUS's YouTube channel and shared across our social media as well. So wishing you to close us out, I want to wish you all a wonderful and well-deserved summer break. Stay hydrated, stay warm, stay cool, and we look forward to staying in touch and welcoming you all again to our next Boss Town Hall in the fall. So thank you once again, and happy Thursday.